We've been told time and time again by the liberal movement in these United States that the Iraq War, authorized with the votes of Democrats, has been responsible for the deaths of over 600,000 Iraqi citizens. They've used the figures from the extremely flawed Lancet Survey to prove their point and score political points. However, the Lancet Survey is fatally flawed. To come up with its 2004 figure, which was slightly over 100,000, it's now ballooned to over 600,000, lead author Les Roberts of the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health in Baltimore and fellow researchers sent Iraqis to interview 998 families in 33 neighborhoods across the country. They asked how many people in each household had died and of what, then extrapolated that to Iraq as a whole. Hence the 100,000 figure, which they insisted was conservative. But consider just this: because the sample size was so small, the range for deaths was wider than Rosie O'Donnell's rump, 8,000 to 194,000. So the Lancet researchers merely split the difference. They said the tiny sample size was necessary because the interviewers were in constant danger, assuredly, from being caught in the crosshairs of an F-15 Strike Eagle. Further, the researchers used death certificates but didn't feel bound by them. Interviews were fine. In the Iraqi culture, it was unlikely for respondents to fabricate deaths, they wrote. Sorry guys, but I've reported from Iraq 3 times, not me, I'm quoting another person of course, and I've written that interviewing Iraqis is essentially worthless because they just tell you what they think will prove advantageous to them. And here's a damning piece of evidence uncovered by David Kane, a fellow at Harvard University's Institute for Quantitative Social Science. The Lancet in 2004 stated more than a third of reported post-invasion deaths and 2/3 of violent deaths happened in the Fallujah cluster. This extreme statistical outlier has created a very broad confidence estimate around the mortality measure and is cause for concern about the precision of the overall finding. An outlier is a figure that is so numerically distant from the rest of the data that it's often treated as an error and hence rejected for use in the final assessment. But Kane decided to include it for a very good reason. If 2/3 of the death data came from Fallujah, how can it possibly be considered an outlier? Politically inconvenient maybe, but not an outlier. Upon including the Fallujah data, Kane concluded that as an incredibly wide as the confidence interval was as given, it now became so wide that the lower bound is negative. This means, and again I'll have the links off to the right side and you can look at Kane's data. This means the figures the Lancet came up with are not of statistical significance and therefore, in statistician lingo, don't count for squat. An interesting side note, as Kane observes in his paper, the Lancet authors refused to provide anyone with the underlying data or even a precise description of the actual methodology. The researchers did release some high-level summary data in highly aggregated form, but they released neither the detailed interviewee level data nor the programming code that would be necessary to replicate their results. And lastly, the burning question: if you thought this Lancet survey was apolitical, think again. The director of the Brussels Disaster Epidemiology Research Center told Canada's Nature News that the numbers of the Lancet survey were inflated and felt it was because of the 2006 midterm elections, a reasonable assumption as study co-author Les Roberts admitted he insisted on an October 2006 release for political reasons. Burnham's latest trouble comes from the American Association for Public Opinion Research. After an 8-month investigation, it found that Burnham violated the association's code of professional ethics and practices. The organization says a Johns Hopkins public health faculty member repeatedly refused to make public essential facts about his research on civilian deaths in Iraq. When asked to provide several basic facts about this research, Burnham refused. Johns Hopkins is also trying to determine if any violation of the school's rules or guidelines for the conduct of the research occurred. So we have a Lancet survey that statisticians have found to be incredibly flawed, even without the essential data, so someone could attempt to replicate the results and find out if they did this in a reliable manner. It's overblown. It's extremely flawed, and it appears that there is political motivations behind it. Even some liberal sites have picked up on this, and and discarded. But there are still some people, some liberals, running around on the internet trumpeting the Lancet Survey as gospel when, in fact, it is nothing but a big steaming pile of BS.